Let's head on over to bunnymuffins.lol/meta and check out the best comps for this week in patch 14.11. There's a pretty minor patch recently, but there definitely are some changes. Level 8 Duelist still going to be the comp of the patch. Following that is going to be Ashe Warden, Sage Lillia, Ghostly Zyra, Syndra Dryad, and Dragonlord fast 9 and 5 costs in the S tier. After that, a bunch of the OP augments got nerfed a bit. If we take a look at Storied Champion, it dropped down to a 4.39 average placement. The other one is going to be Lucky Paws. That one's at a 4.28. Still decent augments, but not the OP level they were before, so they dropped down to the A tier. Mythic Lillia, going to be another solid comp if you don't want to play Sage. Midnight Siphon Yorick, Ethereal Blades Shen. This duo behemoth combo is still a behemoth. Umbral Alune, Dryad Reroll, Kayn Sin, Kog'Maw, Duelist Reroll, Carousel Bruisers. Got a small buff, nothing too crazy. Storyweaver Bard, Shen and Senna, small buff as well. Lux Reroll, Aphelios, Janna, Zyra, Zoe, Soraka, Arcanist Warden, Alune Invoker, and Syndra Fated gonna round out the A tier. And then dropping down to the B tier, we have Ghostly 4 cost, Ink Shadow Kaisa. Other people are gonna be playing a few more of the Carousel Bruisers, so it's a bit harder to pull off the Ink Shadow Kaisa. Yone Reroll got a couple of buffs. Not sure if it's enough. A lot of other comps like playing Yone just to have him in sort of some Umbral build. Sometimes you play him as a spare Reaper if you really need it, but overall the buffs to Yone aren't enough to quite put it back on the map. Storyweaver Reroll, Mythic Bard, Kha'Zix Reroll, and then Build Different, still garbage. Actually, let's look at how hilarious Build Different is. We're going to type it in right now. We're on patch 14.11, and it is at a 5.0. Holy cow. Let's see if it improved from previous patch. It got better. They did get buffed. 5.53 to 5.0. So whenever you're averaging a 5.0, just remember, things could be worse. You could be at a 5.5, you know? Let's get on into the comps, though. We have level 8 and 9 Duelists. This one's going to be, again, one of your bread and butters of the patch. You just go 6 Duelists. 8 Duelists if you have a Duelist crest or emblem, because Aurelia is a complete monster, Lee Sin, pretty solid overall, and you stabilize well in the mid game with Volibear and Tristana because they're easy to 2-star, and overall they're just pretty solid units, and Duelists just give you so much attack speed and a ton of value. Item holders at the start of the game could be Darius, Kiana, things like that. Emblem holders for your Duelist crest, you want it on Wukong or Rakan. And then most importantly, leveling pattern, you want to follow standard leveling. If you want to get more information such as like all these specific item recommendations and you want to like reference it whenever you're playing the game, head on over to the website bunnymuffins.lol/meta, where we update this every single week, where we have like the whole how to play section, all the items here if you want more detail. But next comp up we have is going to be the Ashe Warden. This comp really excels because it's easy to play, pretty affordable. And if you like building Rageblade, it's one of those Rageblade comps, and we'll get into a couple of the other ones later. So if that's the build path you like, if you like taking tiny but deadly, pumping up, things like that, Ashe is a great comp to kind of complement that with. Tanks can be a Mumu, Nautilus, or Alawi, depending on what you're hitting that game. And then you have the 4 snipers in the back. They do a ton of damage. I'd say the most important thing you want to make sure you have in this comp is some sort of armor piercing, so getting the Last Whisperer is pretty critical. And then for leveling pattern, you want to follow standard leveling. Next comp up we have is Sage Lillia, one of the go-to AP comps of the patch. So we saw like a AD comp here, another AD comp over there, but Lillia is going to be the first AP comp that we're going to look at today. So what do we want for that? So if you like a lot of AP, you can itemize both Lillia and Morgana. We'll get into some other builds that I recommend where when you get a mix of physical and magic damage, what you should kind of go for. But if you have a lot of magic damage, Lillia plus Morgana use a ton of those. So you get like 2 mana regeneration items, a Morello for Morgana. She's essentially like a super spreader of Morello. And then Hat Jeweled Gauntlet on Lillia. But really, if you scroll down to the item sections, there's like a bunch of other stuff you could build that work really well on her. And then a bunch of utility items on Nautilus. Also, just like how you want armor penetration in this Ashe build, you want magic penetration in this Lillia build. Getting an Ionic Spark on Nautilus is really good. Maybe a Static Shiv in the backline isn't so bad. It really does help your team shred through a lot of the super tanks that kind of happen in this game. But standard leveling again for this one, a bunch of like 4 cost comps are going to be kind of the core here. But that's pretty much how you're going to be approaching this patch. At the beginning of the game, if you don't get some sort of crazy augment combo, you should be aiming for going to level 8 with 50 gold and rolling down and going for one of those first couple of comps that we saw. Next comp up we have is Ghostly Zyra. This is going to be the first reroll comp that we're going to look at. 3-star Shen, 3-star Zyra, pretty solid combo. tank items on Shen, ability power items on Zyra plus 1 mana item, and then just throw in a bunch of other 3-star 2 costs if you manage to hit them. You want to follow the 2-cost reroll leveling pattern, which means you go to level 6 and roll down to 50 every single turn until you get Zyra 3 and Shen 3. Riven and Aatrox don't really matter. What people like to do once they get Shen 3 and Zyra 3 is level up, throw in a bunch of other ghostly units or maybe some sage units, because those are gonna be what powers your team a lot more. For this one, I highly recommend reading the instructions down here for the level 6 reroll, because this goes into the methodology just a little bit more. We also do have like a leveling guide at the very top of the website up here if you click on this leveling button over here, where we go into the leveling patterns in a lot more detail. But the next comp we are going to be looking at is going to be Syndra and Dryad. Syndra is back, she got buffed a bunch, and she really needs the item blue buff. This is like by far Syndra's best item. You can't play without it. And then after that, just throw a bunch of ability items on her. Main tanks up front is going to be Thresh and Ornn. And if you ever get like a spatula on this comp, it's really powerful because you could get either Dryad or Fated spatula, both of which work really well. You could go for like 6 Dryad in some games, you could go for 7 Fated in some games. And we do list out the best emblem holders down here. For Dryad, you want to put it on either Syndra or Thresh, depending on who has room. And then Set also works too. For Fated, you want Ornn or Azir. Again, depends on who has open item slots, but the buff is really big. For your tanks, you have a lot of beefiness, so if you have a lot of tank items, this comp is pretty good to go for. But of course, getting the blue buff is super duper important. And then in the late game, you use Azir and Set to kind of carry you there. So to get a top 4, Syndra and Ornn are going to be the key. To get a top 3, getting a 1-star Set or Azir is going to work out pretty well. And then to get a top 2 or even win the game, getting 2-star Set, 2-star Azir, or even getting some sort of crazier combo, maybe like a 3-star Thresh, would work out really well, or having some sort of like 7 Fated, 6 Dryad type of combo. But pretty solid comp as like a solo carry. Next comp up we have is Fast 9ing and 5 costs. This one's one of my favorites just because it's fun to play Fast 9. A little risky though, a little harder to do. You can only do it in specific games where you have a lot of economy. You also have to know how to play around every single 2-star legendary, because you can't choose which 2-star legendary you get every single game. So you have to kind of build items that mix and match with what you could possibly get. So building a bunch of flexible items generally is the way to go here. And sometimes like the unit you 2-star, you only have like 2 available items on them, but then you eventually get the 3rd item you need off like the carousel or one of the dragons in the late game. But to do a Fast 9, you normally do standard leveling, and then you kind of see how well your team's doing. If your team's doing really well, you don't need to roll as hard as you do when you normally do standard leveling, and that allows you to get to level 9 a lot faster. Alternatively, if you have a really big health pool, if you got Tiniest Titan, for example, getting to level 9 is pretty easy because you just have more health than other people, you can take more losses, and you can be a bit more greedy with your gold. For items, I'm just going to name the best item on each of the legendaries that we see here. For Aurelia, it's definitely going to be the red buff or Morello to apply the anti-heal. Wukong blue buff I think is essential. Azir, my favorite item probably is going to be Static Shib, but like everyone builds Spear of Shojin, they're both really good. Rakan can use anything. Udyr, I like the Crown Guard a lot, but also getting Titans is pretty good too, and some sort of healing. 4 Dragonlord's gonna be the core of the comp because you get a nice little stun in the middle of the round, and it just buffs up your whole team, and when you're running a lot of legendaries, obviously getting any sort of buff is really good. Next comp up we have is going to be the A tiers Lucky Paws Kobuko. If you get the Kobuko augment, you could go for this. It's not an auto win or anything like that, but if you have maybe 3 Kobukos at the start of the game, I would definitely go for this with some sort of like tank items as you see here. Really powerful stuff. Go for 6 Bruiser, 8 if it's even possible if you get a lot of +1 Bruisers, and then just throw some DPS in the back. I like Kai'Sa the most. Synergy wise, it fits with the team the easiest, so that's why she's often a preferred pick there. Next build up we have is Storied Champion Garen. Even though it's called Storied Champion, you might think you build a lot of Storyweaver with him. You mainly go for Wardens because you want Garen to be your main carry. We did the data checking from before. It did get nerfed a bunch. It used to be the best comp. Still good, but it's not auto win anymore. Before I said if you have like 2 Garens or something like that, you should go for this, but if you have 3 Garens, I'd say it's safe to kind of stick with this. That way, after you pick up the augment, you have 6 copies of Garen because it gives you 3 copies, and then it's not too hard to find the final 3 to really snowball the mid game. But just play a lot of Wardens once you get Garen 3, like level up, find Wardens, find Nautilus, find Set, find Gnar, things like that, and then just throw them in, because they really buff up Garen a ton. I like having Bloodthirster on Garen plus 2 other items. Titan's Resolve probably going to be the best one. Double Titan's good. Starex good, things like that. Next build up we have is Lillia Mythic. This is going to be with 5 Mythic and 4 Invokers. So it's a pretty Lillia focused build. Annie and Sylas are going to be the main tank. It doesn't really matter who you use. Just pick whoever you 2-star first. I do prefer Annie being the main tank over Sylas, but don't sweat it too much if you have all your tank items on Sylas because you 2-starred Sylas first. You don't really need to grief your whole team by finding a new Annie and swapping the items over onto her. Instead of finding a second copy of Annie to replace the items, I'd much rather go like level 9, add in other units, or even level 10. For items in the back, any mana regeneration item for Lillia is good. Blue buff or Shojin both work. And then you just go AP. Same with Hui. Hui likes a Shojin, Morello, and then some AP, and then Azir. All the same Azir items as you saw in previous images, such as like Static Shiv, Spear Shojin, Nashers, things like that are gonna do fine on him. Next comp up we have is Midnight Siphon Yorick. This is one of those 2-cost reroll comps from the hero augments. This one's going to be centered around Yorick. If you have a lot of defensive items, it's really good to go for this because Yorick loves everything defensive. Then similar to the other hero augments where you throw in all the tank traits, it's the same exact thing with Yorick. Instead of doing like Wardens for Garen or Bruisers for Kobuko, you just do Behemoth, and it's going to be the same exact thing for the Shen build. You just throw in 6 Behemoth and you're pretty much chilling. The difference between Shen and the Yorick build, again, comes down to items. If you have tank items, Yorick is going to be your go-to if you have the choice between the two. And then for Shen, he wants like Rage Blade and attack speed items. And keep in mind, both of these comps can only be played with the augments. They're both very easy to play. You just need to hit level 6 and slow roll for 3-star Yorick and 3-star Shen. They're pretty much the only units that matter in the comp. And then you level up, throw in any secondary you can. For Yorick, Alune makes a lot of sense. For the Shen comp, it literally can be anything. Shen kind of is enough because he does true damage, so you could kind of just have more tanks to kind of get a beefier front line, but adding in ghostly units work out pretty well because of his single target damage. Next comp up we have is Umbral Alune. This one's going to be 4 to 6 Umbral as the core. Alune 3-star, Yone 3-star sometimes. You really just care about Alune. Yone isn't really that important. And then later on you could itemize Sylas, sometimes even Kayn if you're lucky to have a ton of items, but for this comp I really like having some sort of econ augment, such as like the team building augment or March of Progress. It really helps getting this comp online that much faster, because after that you want to level up, get to 6 Umbral, look for set, and it's kind of hard to do that if you roll a lot of gold on level 7 because you took like triple combat augment. Sometimes it works out if you hit, but if you don't hit, getting the econ one, you kind of regret not taking it. Dryad Reroll is going to be the next comp up. This comp got buffed a little bit in the recent patch. Gnar is going to be pretty powerful. You can pair it up with Kindred and other units. Some people even use like Senna plus Gnar, but you want at least 4 Dryad because it's that important for the team. If you're running Kindred carry, obviously pair it up with Reaper, but you could add in Wardens to help out Gnar as well. It kind of depends on what units you hit. So as you're playing this comp, you're going to be doing 2-cost reroll. Just like as you're rolling down, you have to ask yourself, are you hitting a lot of Gnars? Are you hitting a lot of Kindreds? Who should you go for? But essentially, whoever you do 3-star, you want to play like the 4 trait for them as much as you can, just because you always want to complement your strongest units. Main tank is going to be Ornn. Just throw all the tank items on him because you have the Dryad buff. He's going to be super duper duper tanky and probably going to give a lot of other items to the rest of your team. Fun tip with Ornn, his ability gives items to the closest member of your team. So always put your most important unit like next to Ornn if they have a spare item slot. But obviously, Gnar's going to have 3 items, so you don't need to put it next to Ornn. But it's always going to go to whichever unit's closest without an existing item. Next one up we have is Lee Sin and Kayn. Classic 4-cost comp, we have Kayn, Lee Sin, and Morgana. Standard leveling is back on the menu after we look through like maybe 5 types of reroll comps. But if you have a lot of frontline items such as like Titan's Resolve, Bloodthirster, Edge and Night, this comp's going to be your go-to. Throw in some heavenly units on it. And if you get like heavenly crests and stuff, those are also really, really good. It's probably what makes this team comp get that much stronger. I probably wouldn't try to play this on purpose without a heavenly crest. But sometimes if you have a lot of Edge and Knights, like, yeah, go for this comp because it's going to be really, really good as long as you hit your units. Next comp up we have is Kog'Maw Reroll. Classic 1-cost reroll comp of the set. You have to build a huge economy during stage 2, roll it down on stage 3-1, and then go all in on stage 4-1 if you have not hit already. But I like to play this only if I can possibly hit it early on in stage 3. So in the beginning of the game, if I have like 4 or 5 Kog'Maws, that's kind of when I would go for this comp, or if I have like some insane reroll augment. But Kog'Maw main carry blue buff Nashers, Cho'Gath main tank, Malphite leftover items on him, Caitlyn leftover items on her. Later on you could play like 5 Mythic if you want, 4 Behemoth. We have 4 Behemoth here. There's a lot of different options. Next build up we have is Duelist Reroll. Contrary to the level 8 and 9 Duelists, you play around Tristana 3 and Volibear 3. This build isn't as strong as the other one, but if you do get Volibear and Tristana 3 for free, well, then it is better because you play the same comp except you have a 3-star Trist and 3-star Voli. But we're not so lucky every game. Aurelia also is a crank later on, but whenever you do 3-cost reroll, it's kind of hard to get specific legendary units because you don't have as much gold to roll at like level 8 or level 9. Sometimes you don't even make it to level 9, but in the games where you do get first place in Duelist, it's often because you have 3-star Voli, 3-star Tristana, and then like at least a 1-star Aurelia. Lee Sin can be a pretty solid option too. Any sort of melee frontline items is going to work. And as you can see already on your screen, there are a lot of different item holders in this comp. So if you're on one of those portals or on one of those encounters that give a lot of items, this is going to be one of the good comps for that. It's mainly because Duelist is a damage trait, and normally damage units kind of suck without items. So if you have a lot of items with units with damage traits, it's like even better than other comps like this, where you have a bunch of trait bots and like utility units or tank units, where itemization isn't as important. Like you really only care about Kai'Sa plus 1 tank unit, and then you put your leftovers on Xayah. But like, if Riven and Aatrox don't have items, like you don't care. Sivir, Teemo, same thing. I mean, if you have items on them, great. I'm not saying it's bad, you know, but we only have a limited amount of resources in this game and on this earth apparently. But the budget build's going to be on top. This is going to be 4 Trickshot, 4 Bruiser. The more expensive 4 Dragonlord build is going to be on the bottom. So if you have a lot of gold, go for the bottom one. If you don't, go for the top one. But the builds are pretty much the same. You just itemize some tank, itemize some DPS, and you really just need Kai'Sa 2. Nothing else really matters because you're playing a 4-cost comp that revolves around one type of carry. For the most part, at least. Like, Xayah is good, but if you're getting a 2-star Xayah, like any 2-star legendary, of course you're going to do well, you know? The main stabilization point is going to be around this Kai'Sa. But this is probably one of my most played builds during the entire set, and seeing it get a bit of a small buff is very welcome because 4 Trickshot was feeling a little lacking last patch, but it's kind of back. There are better 4-cost comps to go for. I'd much prefer to go Ashe, for example, if I was going to go some sort of attack damage comp, but it's a nice backup in case too many people are playing Ashe. Next comp up, we have a Storyweaver Bard. Only play this if you have a lot of Rage Blades. Do a 3-cost reroll, get Tahm Kench 3, get Bard 3. Nothing too complicated there. After that, we have Shenna, 3-star Senna, 3-star Shen. Tank items on Shen, damage items on Senna. Again, nothing too complicated, 2-cost reroll there. You do prefer to get like some sort of good tattoo. I actually need to fix this a bit. We need to data check the tattoos. So I'm going to go to the item stats on teamfight.lol. I'm going to scroll over onto Ink Shadow items. And right now, like, Force is going to be the best one, probably because of Udyr. Normally you use it when you have an Udyr. Bombardment, Toxin, Decent, they're actually all pretty close to each other. But if you do have a certain tattoo, the itemization becomes a lot easier because, like, let's say you have some sort of damage tattoo, which is one of the more common ones, right? That means you just need one less item on Senna, which makes the build much more consistent because you don't need like perfect items on everyone anymore. I mean, you still want perfect items, but it's easier to get because one of them is going to be the tattoo. But the most important thing is just hitting the 3 stars, so only play this comp if you have a lot of copies of Shen and a lot of copies of Senna before you commit. Kind of like dating, you kind of don't want to commit to a relationship if you don't know the other person that well. Well, in TFT, you don't want to commit to a comp if you don't have that many copies of the champion. Next comp up we have is Lux Reroll. This is going to be the Porcelain build with Arcanist, and it really works out well if you have a lot of added traits. So if you're on Wandering Trainers, Wandering Sentinels, whatever it's called nowadays, if you get Arcanist Crown, Porcelain Crest, Arcanist Crest, you're going to be having a really good day because this comp explodes in power with like 6 Porcelain or 8 Arcanist. Sometimes you can even get both. But essentially, it's a 2-cost reroll comp that turns into a 3-cost reroll comp. You get Lux 3 first, then you get a Mumu 3. Sometimes you even get Zoe 3 and itemize her, or a Lowy and you kind of run like a duo tank. But overall, it's a really good build. Your late game is going to be your Lissandra, so you could throw extra items on her too. And I've seen all sorts of different Lux builds work. You could do like Damage Lux, you could do like Static Shiv Lux. Static Shiv Lux is probably my favorite type of build. just because with Porcelain she attacks so quickly, and you get a lot of value from that static shiv. Next build up we have is Aphelios Reroll. I'd really only play this if I have like a Rage Blade and some sort of +1 Fated to get to 7 Fated. It's really good. You just put it on your extra unit. It could be either like Udyr, Ornn, things like that. Just make sure you're running some other sniper so you get 2 sniper, but 7 Fated, 2 sniper gonna be the ideal way to play this. 3 cost reroll, Thresh main tank, Aphelios main damage dealer. Next build up we have is Janna Zyra reroll. They actually nerfed this comp a little bit because they nerfed Too Healthy, and I say to only play this comp if you have either Too Healthy or Enter the Dragon. Still a very good build though. It's just not as like dominant as it was before. We can actually data check Too Healthy down here, and it's still a 4.22. What was it before? It was a 4.09, so it is a little bit worse, but nothing crazy. It's still very good. You just have to hit the comp though. Next build up we have is Zoe, Soraka, and Diana reroll. It's the same build except with Zoe 3-star instead of the Janna. But if you get a lot of Zoes, you could play this build, or you could play some sort of Arcanist build. Both of them work. Next build up we have is Arcanist Warden. I guess speaking of Arcanist, but this one mainly revolves around Syndra. Again, you want the blue buff and AP items on Syndra. Main tank's gonna be Illaoi, Amumu, sometimes Nautilus. Depends who you hit 2-star first. Like normally I like focusing my utility items on one unit and then like the pure tank units on someone else. So if I have 2-star Amumu, it's Amumu. If I have 2-star Nautilus, it's going to be Nautilus for the full tank, and then utility on Illaoi pretty decent there. Lissandra going to be your late game, of course, because you're playing some sort of Arcanist build. She's always going to be the late game insurance because she's the legendary. But this build is pretty flexible and great for pivoting into other different comps, because you could run 4 Arcanist, 4 Warden with like the cheaper Arcanist or like cheaper Wardens and then go into other builds, or you could kind of commit to this if you hit like Set and Lissandra early on, but it's an okay build there. You could also go for like 6 Arcanists instead and like drop the Wardens, just go like a pure Arcanist build. It really depends on what you hit that game, so this comp is a bit harder to play because sometimes you don't know exactly what you're going, but it's going to depend on what units you're 2-starring for free in order to save up gold and go level 9, level 10. Some comps are strong because like the final build or like the exact build is really good. Some comps are strong because you have a lot of different outs, so you don't have to rely on hitting certain units. And this is one of those examples where it's a good comp because you don't have to hit very specific units. You can kind of mix and match as you go. So if you get like a lot of Zoes, as we talked about before, you could run like Zoe carry. You don't have to run like Syndra carry and go for like 6 Arcanists or something like that. If you get a bunch of the key legendaries such as like Set and Lissandra, going like the split build that you see here, 4 Arcanist, 4 Warden, maybe not so bad of an idea. But lots of different options. The world is your oyster. Just do whatever comes naturally to your team. Next build up we have is Alune Invoker reroll. This is going to be one of those like 6 Invoker builds, but I like the other Alune build a bit more. But if you get like Annie 2-star for free, Lillia 2-star for free, then I would kind of go for this comp over the Umbral build. Next one up we have is Syndra Fated. If you have Fated emblem, that's when I would go for this. If you don't, I'd probably skip it and go for the Syndra Dryad build instead if I was getting like a blue buff in the early game and leaning towards some sort of AP comp. There's also Lillia as well, but sometimes you get Fated emblem in stage 3 and then you're like, what do I do? I was planning on going Lillia with blue buff, but maybe I go for Syndra instead, match the 7 Fated with 4 Arcanists, and then also get some sort of magic penetration through the Static Shiv or the Ionic Spark. But standard leveling for this because you're going for 4 cost units, nothing too crazy there. B tiers, you have the Ghostly build. They did buff 8 Ghostly, but Kai'Sa just isn't that strong. They buffed Trickshot in the way of 4 Trickshot, but 2 Trickshot wasn't really touched that much. The Ink Shadow's kind of not as good anymore. Yeah, you see also Ink Shadow Kai'Sa here. Seen better days. It's still decent comps, like all the B tier comps. It's not never play them, it's just only play them situationally. Goes for the A tier comps as well, but I would say these are like even more situational. Heavenly Yone got a bunch of buffs, like some augments got buffed, Yone got buffed too, but it really just isn't enough, it seems. I mean, we could look at like the 3 cost units over here. Like you see Yone is at a 4.5 with like pretty low play rate. Actually, like the second lowest play rate other than Bard, but it's just kind of seen better days. Yone sometimes is used with like the Alune build, so the data isn't as like accurate as it is for some other units. But maybe in a future patch, like another small buff to Yone, maybe he'll be back in action like before. Storyweaver Reroll is going to be the next build. It's one of those 1-cost reroll builds. They're trying to popularize a lot of like the 1-cost reroll comps and 2-cost reroll comps, but apart from Kog'Maw, for 1 cost at least, nothing really is hitting quite as hard. Mythic Bard. This is just like the same Bard build, but with Mythic focus instead of the kind of mixed build that we saw before. And then C tier built different. We already talked about that, averaging a 5.0. That is going to be way too below average for me. But to sum up the patch for the next 2 weeks, bread and butters are going to be the 4-cost builds at level 8. Duelists, Ashe Warden, Sage Lillia, Syndra Dryad. Those are going to be the best. For rerolls, Ghostly Zyra for 2 costs. If you have one of the champion augments, you can go for any of them. Kobuko, Lucky Paws, Garen, Yorick, and Shen. I'd probably skip on the other ones though that are not mentioned here. And then for 3 costs, it's a bit more situational, but like Umbral Reroll, Bard if you have perfect items, they're possible. It's not the best thing ever. I'd rather do like the level 8 builds, but if you have like a lot of lesser duplicators, it's something to consider. But what I like to do in a lot of games or a lot of patches in TFT is look at my items at the start of the game. If I have a lot of attack damage items, I just go all in on that and flex between the 2 or 3 builds that exist out there. So you go for like Duelist or Ashe, sometimes even Kai'Sa as a backup if you go AD. If you go ability power, it's going to be the Sage Lillia, Ghostly Zyra if you have a bunch of Zyras, or Syndra Dryad. And then if you have a lot of gold, you go for some sort of fast 9 comp. That's mainly how a lot of different TFT patches are kind of played. It might not be optimal in all cases, but it's like very easy to do for most people. In this meta, like wait till level 8, roll down a little bit, whichever path you're going, depending on your items, just like switch to those comps if you see copies of those units. So if you see like a couple of Morganas, couple of Lilias, like definitely go the Lillia build. If you see like Syndra, then go Syndra. Sometimes it's a bit more tricky where you get like a 1-star Syndra, but you have like 2-star Annie. I'd say like go for the Syndra Dryad build in those cases. Just because you got the Annie already for free, just throw the items on her. Or the Ornn, whoever you're 2-starring. Obviously, if you commit to a comp at the start of the game by taking one of the +1 traits, such as like Fated Emblem, then you're like pretty much locked in. So unless I have like a really good win streak start, I'd kind of avoid that. I'd rather just take a flexible augment and then flex a little bit, and then do like a fake flex between the magic damage or physical damage builds. But that's gonna be it for me today. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Hopefully it helps you climb a little bit in TFT, and if it has, I'd say subscribe, but you already know that you should do that. But also tell your friends who are kind of getting into TFT, maybe want to get a little bit higher rank than they are currently. But I've been updating this website for almost 5 years now. Like TFT is turning 5 years old. So it's been a very long time. I feel like the years have just kind of like went by in like the blink of an eye. But just like this Friday and every other Friday, we'll be updating this. So hopefully I'll see you all next time.